Aiden and Sebastian Whitley were two identical twins, and inseparable since their birth. Together, they shared everything, from their looks to their interests and even their closest friends. They seemed perfect, but beneath the surface, secrets hidden behind closed doors. Growing up in the small town of Willow Park, Texas, Sebastian and Aiden were often referred to as the Golden Twins. It wasn't just because they excelled in everything they did, whether it was sports, school, or simply being the life of the party, but because they were seen as two halves of a perfect whole. It seemed to everyone else that Sebastian and Aiden had a bond like no other, but the truth was, their connection ran much deeper than anyone could have imagined. It started innocently enough, as these things often do. In their early teenage years, the twins spent most of their time together. Their shared room was their sanctuary, where they would talk about everything: sports, school, friends, and dreams of the future. But as they grew older, those conversations began to shift into something else. Late at night, when the rest of the house was silent, the two brothers would lie awake in their beds only a few feet apart and talk for hours. These late-night conversations were different. They carried an intensity that neither of them quite understood at first. Their voices were softer, their words more vulnerable. They spoke of things they wouldn't dare share with anyone else, not even their closest friends. The trust between them was absolute, and it was during these quiet moments that something began to change. It wasn't just that they were growing closer, it was that they were starting to feel things neither of them could fully comprehend. At first, it was just lingering glances or an accidental brush of the hand that seemed to last a little too long. But slowly, those innocent touches and looks began to carry a weight that neither of them could ignore. Sebastian, always the more daring and impulsive of the two, was the first to acknowledge it, even if only to himself. He noticed how his heart would race when Aiden smiled at him in that particular way, how his stomach would twist with a strange kind of excitement whenever they were alone together. He couldn't explain it, but he didn't want to. He only knew that the feelings were real, and they were growing stronger with each passing day. Aiden, on the other hand, was more cautious. He felt the same thing Sebastian did, but he was afraid to admit it, even to himself. He tried to push those feelings away, bury them deep inside where they couldn't cause any harm. After all, they were brothers. This wasn't supposed to happen. But no matter how hard he tried to deny it, the connection between them only grew stronger, and soon it became impossible to ignore. One night, when their parents were out of town and the house was eerily quiet, everything changed. It was a typical evening for the twins, just the two of them in their shared room, watching a movie on the small TV at the foot of their beds. But as the night wore on, the tension in the air became palpable. Sebastian couldn't stop thinking about the way Aiden had looked at him earlier that day, and Aiden could feel his pulse quicken every time Sebastian shifted on the bed beside him. The movie ended, but neither of them moved. The silence between them was thick, filled with all the unspoken thoughts and feelings they had been trying so hard to suppress. Sebastian, unable to take it any longer, was the first to break the silence. "Aiden," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" Aiden turned to look at his brother, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what Sebastian wanted to talk about. He had felt it too, the shift in their relationship, the way things had started to change between them. But he wasn't ready to face it. "What is it?" Aiden asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sebastian hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "Do you ever feel like things are different between us?" he asked finally, his eyes searching Aiden's face for a reaction. Aiden's stomach twisted with anxiety. He didn't want to answer, didn't want to acknowledge the feelings that had been swirling inside him for so long. But he couldn't lie to Sebastian, not when his brother was looking at him like that, like he already knew the answer. "Yeah," Aiden admitted quietly, "I have." Sebastian exhaled, relieved that he wasn't alone in this. "I don't know what it means," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's real, right? It's not just me?" Aiden nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "It's real," he whispered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared secret hung heavy in the air like a storm about to break. Sebastian, always the one to push boundaries, reached out and gently touched Aiden's arm. The touch was innocent enough, but it sent a shiver down Aiden's spine. "We shouldn't be feeling like this," Aiden said, his voice trembling. "We're brothers, Sebastian. This isn't right." "I know," Sebastian replied, his hand still resting on Aiden's arm. "But I can't help it, can you?" Aiden looked down, unable to meet Sebastian's eyes. He couldn't deny it. No matter how wrong it felt, he couldn't stop the feelings that had been growing inside him for months. "No," he whispered. Sebastian moved closer, his hand sliding down to take Aiden's. "Then maybe we don't have to fight it anymore," he said softly. "Maybe we just let it happen." Aiden's heart raced as Sebastian's words sunk in. He wanted to pull away, to stop this before it went any further, but he couldn't. The pull between them was too strong, and before he knew it, he was leaning in, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was hesitant, almost shy, as if they were both afraid of what it would mean. But as soon as their lips met, something inside both of them clicked into place. It was like everything they had been feeling finally made sense. The fear, the confusion, the longing, it all melted away, leaving only the two of them caught in a moment that felt both inevitable and terrifying. When they finally pulled apart, both brothers sat in stunned silence, their minds racing with the enormity of what had just happened. They'd crossed a line, one that they could never uncross. But even as guilt gnawed at them, there was no denying the intensity of the connection they shared. "We can't tell anyone," Aiden said, his voice shaky. "No one can ever know." "I know," Sebastian agreed. "It'll be our secret." And so, the twins made a pact. Their love, intense, forbidden, and all-consuming, would remain hidden from the world. No one would ever know what they shared. Not their friends, not their parents, not anyone. It was a secret that bound them together in ways they couldn't fully understand, and though they both knew it was dangerous, they were powerless to resist. But beneath the surface, things were changing. Over the following months, their relationship grew more intense. What had started as stolen kisses in the dark soon turned into something much deeper, something neither of them could control. They became addicted to each other, finding any excuse to be alone, to escape into the secret world they had built together. One autumn afternoon, when the leaves were just beginning to change, the twins decided to skip school and spend the day together. They didn't plan it, they rarely did, but as they walked to the bus stop that morning, Sebastian had given Aiden a look, one that said everything without needing to say anything at all. They turned in the opposite direction, heading into the woods behind their house instead of toward the bus stop. The woods had always been their escape, a place where they could disappear from the world and be alone together. They spent the day lying in the soft grass by the river, talking and laughing, stealing kisses when they were sure no one was around. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on their faces as they lay side by side, the rest of the world forgotten. For a few hours, it was just them, free from the weight of their secret. "I wish it could always be like this," Sebastian said, his voice soft as he stared up at the sky. "Just the two of us. No one else." Aiden turned to look at him, his heart aching with a mixture of love and sadness. "But it can't be," he replied quietly. "We can't hide forever, Sebastian." Sebastian sighed, turning to face Aiden. "I know," he said, his eyes darkening with frustration. "But I don't care. I don't care what anyone else thinks. As long as I have you, nothing else matters." Aiden smiled, but the worry never left his eyes. He wished he could be as carefree as Sebastian, that he could let go of the fear that constantly gnawed at him. But he couldn't. He knew their secret wouldn't stay hidden forever, and when it finally came out, everything would come crashing down. But for now, in that moment, Aiden pushed the fear aside and let himself be with Sebastian. They lay there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, as if they had all the time in the world. As the weeks passed, the bond between them grew even stronger, but so did the tension. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to keep their secret. There were close calls, moments when they were almost caught, times when they had to scramble to explain why they were always together, always sneaking away. Their parents began to notice the change in their behavior, though they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. One evening, while the family was sitting down for dinner, Their mother, Helen Whitley, gave the twins a strange look. "You two have been spending an awful lot of time together lately," she said, her tone light but curious. "Is everything okay?" Sebastian, always quick on his feet, smiled and shrugged. "Of course, Mom," he said casually. "We're just close, that's all." Their father, Theodore, who rarely looked up from his dinner, raised an eyebrow. "Just don't get too caught up in each other," he muttered, almost as an afterthought. "You've got your own lives to live." Aiden felt his stomach drop at his father's words. Did he know? Did they suspect? He glanced at Sebastian, who gave him a reassuring smile. But Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that their secret was slowly starting to unravel. The fear of being discovered weighed heavily on Aiden. He found himself pulling away from Sebastian, making excuses not to be alone with him as often as before. He loved Sebastian, but the guilt was becoming too much. He started to wonder if they had made a mistake, if what they were doing was destroying both of them. Sebastian noticed the change right away. He saw how Aiden avoided him, how he flinched whenever their parents mentioned the two of them. It hurt him, but it also made him angry. Why couldn't Aiden just let go, like he had? Why did he have to make everything so complicated? Later on, Sebastian confronted Aiden in their room. "What's going on with you?" Sebastian asked, his voice sharp with frustration. "Why are you pulling away?" Aiden looked at him, guilt and fear swirling in his eyes. I don't know if we can keep doing this," he admitted quietly. "It's getting harder to hide, Sebastian. What if someone finds out?" Sebastian's face hardened. "No one's going to find out," he said firmly. "As long as we're careful, no one will ever know. Don't you trust me?" "It's not about trust," Aiden said, his voice trembling. "It's about what we're doing. It's not right, Sebastian." Sebastian's eyes flashed with anger. "Not right?" he repeated. How can you say that, after everything we've been through, after everything we've shared? How can you say this isn't right?" Aiden looked away, unable to meet Sebastian's eyes. "I don't know, he whispered. I'm scared, Sebastian. I'm scared of what's going to happen if we keep going down this path." Sebastian's anger faded, replaced by a deep sadness. He stepped closer to Aiden, his voice softening. "I'm scared too," he admitted now, "but I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you, Aiden." Aiden looked up at him, his heart breaking. He didn't want to lose Sebastian either, but he didn't know how much longer he could keep living like this. Constantly looking over his shoulder, constantly hiding. "We'll figure it out," Sebastian said quietly, reaching out to take Aiden's hand. "We always do." Aiden nodded, but deep down, he knew things were changing. The secret that had once brought them closer together was now threatening to tear them apart. Despite Sebastian's reassurances, things didn't get better. In fact, they got worse. Aiden's fears grew with every passing day, and the weight of their secret was becoming unbearable. He tried to distance himself from Sebastian, to create some space between them, but it was nearly impossible. They were twins, inseparable by nature, and their parents, friends, and teachers noticed when they weren't together. But it wasn't just the outside world that made it hard for Aiden to pull away. It was Sebastian himself. Sebastian had always been the stronger, more dominant one in their relationship, and Aiden had always followed his lead. But now Sebastian's behavior was changing. The love that had once been so tender and exciting was starting to feel suffocating. Sebastian's grip on Aiden was tightening, and Aiden didn't know how to break free. The more Aiden tried to distance himself, the more possessive Sebastian became. He started questioning Aiden's every move, where he was going, who he was with, why he didn't want to spend time together like they used to. It wasn't the kind of possessiveness that was obvious to the outside world. Sebastian knew how to mask it, how to make it look like he was just a concerned brother. But Aiden could feel the shift. Sebastian was losing control, and it scared him. The secret between them grew heavier with each passing day, and what had once been thrilling and intoxicating had become a burden, something they both carried in silence. The guilt that had been gnawing at Aiden began to take its toll on him. He became quieter, more withdrawn, struggling with the weight of what they had done and what they continued to do. At school, things were different now. They used to be inseparable, always side by side in the hallways, finishing each other's sentences, sharing private jokes. But now, there was a distance between them that was hard to ignore. Aiden avoided Sebastian whenever he could, using any excuse to put space between them. He would linger at his locker, stay late for after-school activities, and even start hanging out with new friends. Sebastian noticed, of course, and it drove him crazy. The more Aiden pulled away, the more desperate Sebastian became to keep him close. One afternoon, as Aiden sat in the library, trying to focus on his homework, Sebastian slid into the seat across from him. His eyes were intense, filled with a mixture of anger and something darker, something possessive. "Why are you avoiding me?" Sebastian asked, his voice low but edged with frustration. Aiden didn't look up from his notebook. "I'm not avoiding you," he muttered, though they both knew it was a lie. "Yes, you are," Sebastian snapped, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "You've been avoiding me for weeks now, and I want to know why." Aiden sighed, setting down his pen. He knew this conversation was inevitable, but he had been dreading it. He had hoped that by putting some distance between them, Sebastian would get the hint. But that clearly wasn't happening. "Sebastian, we can't keep doing this," Aiden said quietly, his eyes finally meeting his brother's. "It's not right." Sebastian's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Aiden could see the flash of anger in his eyes. "Not this again," Sebastian muttered, leaning in closer. "I told you. It doesn't matter, no one knows and no one's going to find out. Why can't you just accept that?" Aiden shook his head, his heart heavy with guilt. "It's not just about getting caught, Sebastian, it's about us. What we're doing, it's wrong. We're brothers." Sebastian's face twisted with frustration. He leaned in even closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "I don't care. I don't care about any of that. All I care about is you, Aiden. I can't lose you." The desperation in Sebastian's voice was clear, and for a moment, Aiden's resolve wavered. He knew that Sebastian was scared of losing the one person who had always been there for him. But Aiden couldn't keep living like this. The guilt, the secrecy, it was tearing him apart. "You won't lose me," Aiden said softly, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "But we can't keep going down this path. It's not healthy, Sebastian. It's not love." Sebastian's expression darkened at those words. He reached across the table, grabbing Aiden's hand with a fierceness that startled him. "Don't say that," Sebastian hissed. "Don't you dare say this isn't love. You don't get to decide that." Aiden tried to pull his hand away, but Sebastian's grip was too tight. "Sebastian, please," he whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "We can't keep doing this." Sebastian didn't let go. His eyes were locked on Aiden's, filled with a determination that scared him. "We're in this together," Sebastian said, his voice trembling with intensity. "You and me, no one else. You're not leaving me." Aiden felt trapped. He wanted to pull away, to run as far from Sebastian as he could, but something held him back. Maybe it was the love he still felt for his brother, despite everything. Or maybe it was the fear that deep down Sebastian was right. Maybe there was no way out of this, but either way, he knew they couldn't go on like this forever. The tension between the twins continued to grow, and soon it was impossible to hide. Their parents, always doting and loving, began to notice the shift in their dynamic. At the dinner table, where the brothers once bantered and laughed, there was now only silence. Their father, a man of few words but always observant, watched them carefully, his brow furrowed in concern. "What's going on with you two?" he asked one evening, setting down his fork. "You've been acting strange lately. Is everything okay?" Aiden froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel Sebastian's eyes on him, waiting for his response. Aiden forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's fine, Dad," he said quickly. "Just school stuff. You know how it is." Their father didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Their mother, on the other hand, wasn't so easily swayed. "You boys have always been so close," she said, her voice filled with concern. "It seems like something's changed between you. Is there something you need to talk about?" Aiden swallowed hard. glancing at Sebastian, who remained silent, his jaw clenched. The weight of their secret hung heavy in the air. And for a moment, Aiden considered telling them everything, coming clean and ending the nightmare once and for all. But he couldn't. The fear of what would happen, the shame of what they had done, kept him silent. "We're fine, Mom," Aiden said quietly. Really? But he wasn't fine. None of this was fine. The pressure was building, and Aiden knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. He couldn't keep living with the guilt, the constant fear of being found out. And he couldn't keep pretending that Sebastian's obsession wasn't spiraling out of control. Sebastian, meanwhile, was growing more possessive by the day. He watched Aiden's every move, growing angry whenever Aiden spent time with anyone else, even their mutual friends. It was as if Sebastian believed that by keeping Aiden close, he could somehow maintain control over the situation, over their relationship, but it wasn't working. The tighter Sebastian held on, the more Aiden pulled away. The breaking point came one afternoon when Aiden, desperate for some space, made plans to hang out with a group of friends after school. He didn't tell Sebastian, knowing that his brother would react badly, but somehow Sebastian found out. As Aiden walked home later that evening, he found Sebastian waiting for him at the corner of their street. His expression was dark, his arms crossed over his chest. Aiden's stomach dropped. "Where were you?" Sebastian demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Aiden sighed, already exhausted from the confrontation he knew was coming. "I was with friends, Sebastian. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," Sebastian snapped, stepping closer. "You didn't tell me. You didn't even bother to ask if I wanted to come." Aiden stared at him, incredulous. "You're not my keeper, Sebastian. I don't have to tell you everything I do." Sebastian's eyes narrowed, and for the first time Aiden saw something truly frightening in his brother's gaze. "You think you can just walk away from me?" Sebastian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you can leave me behind?" Aiden's heart raced as he realized just how deep Sebastian's obsession had become. This wasn't just about them being brothers anymore. This was something far darker, far more dangerous. "I'm not leaving you," Aiden said, his voice shaking. "But we can't keep doing this, Sebastian. It's not healthy." Sebastian didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed Aiden's arm, his grip tight and unyielding. "You're mine, Aiden," he whispered, his voice filled with a terrifying mix of love and possession. "You don't get to walk away." Aiden tried to pull away, but Sebastian's grip only tightened. The fear that had been building inside him for weeks finally broke through, and he realized that Sebastian wasn't going to let him go, not without a fight. But the story didn't end there. There was still more to come, more than either of them could have imagined, and the consequences of their love would soon spiral out of control in ways they couldn't have foreseen. Aiden's mind raced as he yanked his arm free from Sebastian's tight grip. The tension between them had escalated, reaching a breaking point that left him feeling cornered. He could see the darkness in Sebastian's eyes, a mix of desperation and possessiveness that sent chills down his spine. They were no longer just brothers tangled in a dangerous secret. Sebastian was unraveling, and Aiden feared where that might lead. "We're brothers, Sebastian," Aiden said, his voice trembling. "This has to stop. We need to go back to how things were before this." Sebastian shook his head. His jaw clenched as he stared at Aiden with an intensity that bordered on madness. "We can't go back. You know that. You're trying to run away from what we have, but you can't. You're mine." Aiden took a step back, trying to keep a calm facade even as fear gnawed at him. "This isn't love, Sebastian. It's an obsession. You're suffocating me." Sebastian's face contorted with anger. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to throw everything away just because you're scared. I won't let you." With those words, Aiden realized the gravity of the situation. Sebastian wasn't just upset, he was losing control. The bond that once brought them comfort had twisted into something toxic, something dangerous. Aiden knew that if he didn't break free soon, things could spiral even further out of control. "Sebastian, please," Aiden pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. "We need space, time apart, just to figure this out." But Sebastian wasn't listening. His eyes were wild, his hands trembling with pent-up rage. "You're not leaving me," he growled. "We belong together. You're not going anywhere." Aiden's pulse quickened as he took another step back, trying to create distance between them. He needed to get away, to escape the intensity that was threatening to consume them both. Without another word, Aiden turned and ran. Sebastian's voice echoed behind him. "You can't run from me, Aiden!" The sound of footsteps pounded in Aiden's ears as he sprinted down the street, his heart racing. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to get away, to clear his mind, to put distance between himself and the suffocating grip Sebastian had on him. Aiden found refuge at a friend's house where he stayed the night, claiming he needed a break from everything. His friend didn't ask questions, sensing Aiden's need for space. But as Aiden lay awake on the couch that night, his thoughts were consumed by Sebastian. How had things gotten this far? How had their bond turned into something so destructive? And what would Sebastian do now that Aiden had pulled away? Was this all going to stop? And unfortunately, it didn't. Back at home, Sebastian was unraveling. Aiden's sudden departure had pushed him over the edge, leaving him pacing the living room in a frenzy. His mind raced with paranoid thoughts. Thoughts of losing Aiden for good, of being abandoned by the only person who truly understood him. The more he thought about it, the more desperate he became. Sebastian replayed their last conversation over and over in his head, each word stoking the fire of his obsession. Aiden didn't understand he couldn't walk away, not after everything they had shared. They were bound together, whether Aiden liked it or not. Sebastian wouldn't let anyone come between them, not even Aiden himself. The next few days were a blur for Sebastian. He barely slept, his mind consumed by thoughts of Aiden. He became increasingly paranoid, imagining all the ways Aiden might try to distance himself, making new friends, spending time with others, maybe even finding someone else. The thought of losing Aiden, of seeing him with someone else, was unbearable. Sebastian began watching Aiden from afar, following him to school, keeping track of where he went and who he talked to. He couldn't stand the idea of Aiden slipping away from him, of their connection being severed. The obsession that had once been hidden beneath the surface now consumed Sebastian entirely. Aiden, on the other hand, tried to move on. He knew the situation with Sebastian was toxic, and he was determined to create distance between them. But no matter how hard he tried, Sebastian was always there, lingering in the background, watching him, waiting for an opportunity to pull him back into the suffocating grip of their relationship. One afternoon, as Aiden walked home from school, he felt a presence behind him. He turned, his heart sinking when he saw Sebastian following him, his expression unreadable. "Sebastian, what are you doing?" Aiden asked, his voice edged with frustration. Sebastian stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I need to talk to you." Aiden shook his head, exasperated. "We've already talked. I told you I need space. This isn't healthy." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "We can fix this. I know we can. You just need to stop pushing me away." "I'm not pushing you away," Aiden replied, his voice firm. "I'm trying to save us both. You're obsessed, Sebastian. You need to let me go." Sebastian's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not letting you go. You don't understand. We belong together. You're the only person I have, Aiden. You can't leave me." Aiden took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He knew he couldn't reason with Sebastian, not in this state. "Sebastian, I love you. I always will. But this isn't love anymore. It's destroying us." Sebastian's hands trembled as he clenched them into fists. He couldn't accept it. Couldn't accept that Aiden was slipping away. The thought of losing him sent a surge of panic through Sebastian's chest, and in that moment, something inside him snapped. Before Aiden could react, Sebastian lunged at him, grabbing his arm with a force that startled him. "You're not leaving me," Sebastian shouted, his voice filled with desperation. Aiden struggled to break free, his heart racing with fear. "Sebastian, stop, you're hurting me." But Sebastian didn't let go. His grip tightened, and Aiden realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't just about their relationship anymore. Sebastian's obsession had turned dangerous, and Aiden wasn't sure if he could escape. "I won't let you leave," Sebastian whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "I won't let you walk away from me." Aiden's mind raced, his body tensing as he realized just how far Sebastian was willing to go. This wasn't love. This was something far darker. something that could destroy them both if it wasn't stopped. But the story didn't end there. There was still more to come. And the darkness that had taken root in Sebastian's heart was only just beginning to show itself. The grip Sebastian had on Aiden was unlike anything he had felt before. Tight, suffocating, and full of desperation. Aiden's pulse raced as he stared into his twin brother's eyes, seeing not just love but a burning need to control him. Sebastian's face, twisted with emotion, revealed just how deep his obsession had grown. "Let go of me," Aiden said, his voice calm but his heart pounding. He didn't want to provoke Sebastian, but he knew he had to get away. Sebastian shook his head, his eyes wide. "I can't, Aiden. You don't get it. I can't live without you. We're supposed to be together. Forever." Aiden swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. "We can't keep doing this. You're not thinking straight, Sebastian. This is too much. It's suffocating me." The word suffocating seemed to cut through Sebastian like a blade. His grip tightened momentarily before he released Aiden's arm, stepping back as if he was shocked by his own actions. Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, his breaths coming in short, erratic bursts. "I just need you," Sebastian muttered, his voice trembling. "I can't lose you, Aiden." Aiden rubbed his sore arm, his mind racing. He had to find a way to calm Sebastian down before things spiraled even further out of control. "You're not going to lose me, Sebastian," Aiden said softly, though he didn't believe his own words. "But we need space, time apart. We can't be like this anymore. It's too much." Sebastian stared at him, silent for a moment, his face unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Aiden standing in the middle of the street, shaken and unsure of what had just happened. And the story didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, Aiden did everything he could to put distance between himself and Sebastian. He avoided their usual hangouts, skipped family dinners, and stopped answering Sebastian's texts. It wasn't easy. Every time he saw Sebastian's name flash on his phone screen, his heart ached with guilt. But he knew it was the right thing to do. He had to protect himself from Sebastian's growing obsession. Meanwhile, Sebastian was unraveling. The more Aiden pulled away, the more desperate Sebastian became. He spent hours pacing his room, consumed by thoughts of Aiden. He replayed their conversations in his head, obsessing over every word, every look, every touch. The idea of Aiden moving on without him was unbearable. He couldn't accept it, he wouldn't. Sebastian began to watch Aiden from afar. He followed him to school, to work, even to the park where Aiden sometimes went to clear his head. Sebastian couldn't help himself. The need to be close to Aiden, to know what he was doing, was overwhelming. He told himself it was love, that he was just protecting Aiden. But deep down, he knew it was something darker. Aiden sensed Sebastian's presence everywhere he went. At first, he brushed it off as paranoia, the result of their intense relationship and the guilt he carried. But soon, it became clear that Sebastian was always nearby, watching him from a distance. It was unsettling, and Aiden didn't know how to confront it. Every time he saw Sebastian's figure lurking in the background, a chill ran down his spine. Then came the day when everything changed. It was a Friday evening, and Aiden had agreed to meet a few friends at a local bar. He hadn't been out in weeks, too caught up in the emotional turmoil with Sebastian. But tonight, he needed an escape. As he sat with his friends, laughing and drinking, he finally started to feel like himself again, like he could breathe without the weight of Sebastian's obsession pressing down on him. But that sense of freedom was short-lived. Aiden glanced up from his drink and froze. Standing at the edge of the bar, watching him intently, was Sebastian. His face was shadowed, his eyes locked on Aiden with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Aiden's heart sank. He had tried so hard to distance himself from Sebastian, to create space between them. But here Sebastian was, staring at him like a predator stalking its prey. Without a word, Aiden excused himself from the table and made his way to the back exit, hoping to slip away unnoticed. He couldn't confront Sebastian here, not in front of his friends. He just needed to get away. But Sebastian followed him. As soon as Aiden stepped into the dimly lit alley behind the bar, he heard Sebastian's footsteps approaching. His stomach twisted with anxiety. He turned to face his brother, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sebastian, what are you doing here?" Sebastian's eyes were wild, filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You're avoiding me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just walk away from me? From us?" Aiden took a step back, his heart racing. "Sebastian, this isn't healthy. You need to stop. We need space." "Space?" Sebastian spat, his voice rising. "You don't get to decide that. We're in this together, Aiden. You don't get to just walk away." "I'm not walking away," Aiden said, though his voice wavered. "But we can't keep going like this. It's destroying both of us." Sebastian's expression darkened. "You're mine, Aiden. No one else gets to have you. No one." Aiden's pulse quickened as he realized just how far gone Sebastian was. This wasn't love anymore. It was an obsession, a dangerous one. And Aiden knew in that moment that if he didn't do something soon, things could take a deadly turn. The tension between the brothers reached an all-time high in the weeks that followed. Aiden tried his best to avoid Sebastian, but every time he thought he had some breathing room, Sebastian would find a way to close the distance. It was suffocating, like a dark cloud hanging over Aiden's every move. Sebastian's obsession consumed him entirely. He couldn't focus on school, on work, or even on his friends. All he could think about was Aiden. The thought of losing him, of watching him slip away, was unbearable. Sebastian's love had twisted into something so all-consuming that he could no longer see the line between love and possession. Aiden, on the other hand, was growing increasingly desperate to escape. He began considering leaving town, going to stay with a relative or moving away entirely. But deep down, he knew that wherever he went, Sebastian would find him. Their bond, once their greatest strength, had now become an inescapable prison. And the pressure was building. It was only a matter of time before something snapped. The days leading up to the breaking point were a blur for Aiden. Everywhere he went, Sebastian was there, watching, waiting, and hovering like a dark shadow he couldn't escape. Aiden felt suffocated, not only by the constant presence of his brother, but by the overwhelming weight of guilt. He had loved Sebastian once, deeply, but that love had been twisted into something dangerous and all-consuming. Now, all he wanted was freedom. One evening, Aiden made a decision that he hoped would finally break the cycle. He was going to leave town, permanently. It was the only way out. He had found a place to stay with a friend in another city, and he planned to leave under the cover of night. No more confrontations, no more discussions. It was too late for any of that. As Aiden packed a small suitcase, his hands trembled. He knew Sebastian would lose his mind when he realized what was happening, but it didn't matter anymore. Aiden's survival, both emotional and physical, depended on getting away from Sebastian. He zipped up his suitcase and took a deep breath, preparing for the final moments in the home they had shared for so long. But, as fate would have it, Sebastian was already one step ahead. Just as Aiden reached for the door to leave, Sebastian appeared, his face pale, eyes wild with fear and rage. He had suspected something like this for days. He'd been watching Aiden more closely than ever, noticing the subtle changes in his behavior, the way he seemed more distant, more determined to sever their connection. "Where do you think you're going?" Sebastian's voice was low, but there was an undeniable edge of menace beneath the surface. Aiden froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He hadn't expected Sebastian to confront him this early. "I'm leaving, Sebastian," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I can't stay here anymore. Whatever this is between us, it's over." Sebastian's eyes darkened and his body tensed. "You think you can just leave me? After everything we've been through? You think you can just walk away like it meant nothing?" Aiden took a step back, his pulse racing. "It wasn't nothing, Sebastian, but it's not healthy anymore. It's not love. It's something else, and it's tearing us apart. You need to let me go." But Sebastian wasn't listening. His breathing grew heavier, his fists clenched at his sides. He had always believed that their connection was unbreakable, that nothing could come between them, not even the fear that had crept into their relationship. The idea that Aiden could leave him, could sever their bond so easily, was more than Sebastian could bear. "No," Sebastian said, shaking his head as if trying to rid himself of the truth. "You can't leave me. You're mine, Aiden. We belong together." Aiden's heart sank as he realized just how far gone Sebastian was. He had hoped deep down that Sebastian would see reason, that he would let him leave peacefully. But now, standing face to face with his twin, Aiden saw the truth. Sebastian wasn't going to let him go, not without a fight. "Sebastian, you need help," Aiden said, his voice soft but firm. "I love you, but not like this. Not anymore. You have to let me go." But Sebastian's eyes filled with rage. "No," he hissed. "If I can't have you, no one can." Aiden's blood ran cold at the words. He had always known that Sebastian's feelings for him had grown dark and obsessive, but hearing those words aloud, hearing the threat behind them, made everything all too real. Before Aiden could react, Sebastian lunged at him, grabbing him by the shoulders and slamming him against the wall. Aiden gasped in pain, struggling to free himself from Sebastian's grip, but Sebastian was stronger, fueled by a dangerous mix of anger and desperation. "You're not leaving me!" Sebastian shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're mine, Aiden. We're supposed to be together, forever." "Sebastian, stop!" Aiden cried, trying to push him away, but it was no use. Sebastian's grip tightened, his fingers digging into Aiden's arms with bruising force. In that moment, Aiden knew that he was in real danger. Sebastian wasn't thinking clearly, wasn't acting like the brother he had grown up with. This was someone else, a version of Sebastian that had been twisted by obsession and fear. "I can't do this anymore, Sebastian," Aiden gasped, his voice filled with desperation. "You have to let me go. Please." But Sebastian only shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. I can't lose you," he whispered. "I won't." Aiden's heart raced as he struggled to break free, panic rising in his chest. He needed to get out of here now. But Sebastian wasn't letting go. His grip was ironclad, and the look in his eyes told Aiden everything he needed to know. Sebastian wasn't going to stop. And then, in a moment of sheer desperation, Sebastian reached for the nearest object, a heavy glass paperweight on the shelf beside them. His movements were fast, almost automatic, as he swung the object toward Aiden's head. The blow landed with a sickening thud. Aiden's world went dark. For a brief moment, everything was still. The weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the air, suffocating and unyielding. Sebastian stood frozen, the paperweight still clutched in his hand, staring down at his brother's motionless body. The reality of what he had done slowly sank in, like a poison seeping through his veins. He dropped the paperweight, his hands shaking uncontrollably as the enormity of his actions hit him like a freight train. "Aiden, no, no," Sebastian whispered, falling to his knees beside his brother. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out to touch Aiden, his fingers trembling as they brushed against his twin's still warm skin. But there was no response. Aiden was gone. Sebastian collapsed beside Aiden's body, sobbing uncontrollably, his mind reeling from the horror of what he had done. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. They were supposed to be together. Forever. But now, all Sebastian had left was the cold, lifeless body of the person he had loved more than anything in the world. The room was silent, save for the sound of Sebastian's ragged breathing and the occasional drip of blood hitting the floor. Outside, the world continued on, unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded within these four walls. Sebastian had lost everything: his brother, his twin, his other half. And there was no coming back from this. The worst is that all the drama wasn't even over. Not yet. Sebastian knelt beside Aiden's lifeless body, his sobs filling the otherwise silent room. The shock of what he had done left him numb, his mind struggling to process the horrific scene before him. His brother, his twin, was gone, and it was his fault. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like an unbearable burden, suffocating him in a sea of guilt and despair. For what felt like hours, Sebastian remained there, motionless, unwilling to accept the finality of what had just happened. His hands, stained with Aiden's blood, trembled as he reached out to touch his brother's face. As if by some miracle he could undo what he had done. "Aiden?" Sebastian whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't want this." But the apology fell into the empty room, unanswered. Aiden's chest didn't rise and fall. His eyes remained closed and his skin grew cold beneath Sebastian's touch. No amount of pleading would bring him back. Sebastian's mind raced, a whirlwind of panic and confusion. What was he going to do? How could he explain this? His heart pounded in his chest as he considered the terrible reality of what had just occurred. He couldn't call the police. They would never believe this was an accident. And even if they did, it wouldn't change the fact that he had killed his own brother. The world outside seemed so far away now, like another reality altogether. In this room, time had stopped. Sebastian couldn't comprehend life beyond this moment, beyond the weight of his actions. But he couldn't stay here forever. With shaky hands, Sebastian reached for his phone, his mind on autopilot as he dialed a number he never thought he'd need. His fingers fumbled over the screen, but after a few seconds, the call connected. "Mom?" Sebastian's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Sebastian? Is everything all right?" His mother's voice was warm and comforting, the last thing Sebastian wanted to hear in that moment. She had no idea the nightmare that had just unfolded. "Mom, Sebastian's throat tightened, and he couldn't find the words. What could he even say? How could he possibly explain what had happened? "Sebastian?" Concern was rising in her voice now. "What's wrong? Where's Aiden?" Those words hit Sebastian like a physical blow. Where's Aiden? The reality of what he'd done came crashing down on him all over again. He couldn't tell her. Not like this. "I'm sorry, Mom," Sebastian said, his voice trembling. I have to go." He hung up the phone, his heart racing, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He felt trapped, cornered by the enormity of what he had done. There was no way out, no way to undo the terrible mistake that had cost him everything. But there was more. Sebastian's mind, already fragile, was beginning to unravel. The walls seemed to close in around him, the air in the room thick and suffocating. Everywhere he looked, he saw Aiden, his clothes, his belongings, the traces of his life scattered throughout the room. Sebastian's love for Aiden had consumed him, twisted his mind into something dark and dangerous. And now, that love had destroyed them both. He staggered to his feet, his legs weak and unsteady beneath him. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't bear to be in this room any longer. He needed to get away, to escape the crushing guilt and sorrow that threatened to swallow him whole. With trembling hands, Sebastian grabbed his jacket and stumbled out of the house. The cool night air hit him like a wave, but it did little to clear the fog in his mind. He wandered aimlessly through the empty streets, his thoughts racing, his heart heavy with the weight of his crime. The town that had once felt so familiar now seemed foreign to him. Every street, every corner reminded him of Aiden, of the life they had shared, of the bond they had once had. It was a bond that had been shattered, broken beyond repair. As Sebastian wandered through the night, he couldn't escape the crushing reality that awaited him. He had killed his brother, the one person who had been his constant companion, his other half. And now he was truly alone. But Sebastian's mind wasn't done spiraling. As the hours passed, his thoughts grew darker, more fragmented. He began to hear Aiden's voice, whispering to him from the shadows, calling out to him from beyond the grave. "You did this, Sebastian. You killed me." Sebastian's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. He was alone, completely and utterly alone. "No, I didn't mean to," Sebastian muttered to himself, his voice shaky. "I didn't want this." But the voice continued, relentless and unforgiving. "You said we'd be together forever, Sebastian. Now look at what you've done." Sebastian clutched his head, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The guilt, the grief, The horror of what he had done was overwhelming. It consumed him, leaving him gasping for air, drowning in the weight of his own conscience. There was no escape, no way to run from the darkness that had taken hold of his soul. And in that moment, Sebastian realized that there was only one way to make things right, only one way to atone for what he had done. He turned and began to walk, his steps slow and deliberate, as though he was being pulled by some invisible force. He knew where he had to go, back to where it had all started, back to the house, back to Aiden. When Sebastian arrived at the house, the stillness inside was almost unbearable. The silence pressed in on him from all sides, suffocating him. He walked into the room where Aiden's body still lay, the blood staining the floor. Sebastian knelt beside his brother's body once more, his heart breaking all over again as he looked down at Aiden's face. The person he had loved most in the world was gone, and it was all his fault. "I'm so sorry, Aiden," Sebastian whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I loved you. I still do. But I can't live without you." With shaky hands, Sebastian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the knife he had grabbed from the kitchen earlier. His heart pounded in his chest as he held it in his hands, the weight of it heavy with the finality of his decision. He looked down at Aiden one last time, his vision blurred by tears. "We were supposed to be together, Aiden, and now we will be." And with that, Sebastian plunged the knife into his own chest. The pain was immediate and excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the agony of living without Aiden. As the blood poured from the wound, Sebastian collapsed beside his brother, his breath growing shallow, his vision fading. In his final moments, Sebastian reached out and took Aiden's hand, just as they had done so many times before. And as the darkness closed in around him, Sebastian finally felt a sense of peace. The brothers, bound together by a love that had become an obsession, were now together, in death. The town would wake the next morning to the horrifying discovery of the Whitley twins, once the golden boys of the community, lying side by side, victims of a love that had turned deadly. But for Sebastian and Aiden, the story had come to an end, together in life and in death. The discovery of Sebastian and Aiden Whitley's lifeless bodies sent shockwaves through the small town, leaving everyone reeling. News of their tragic death spread quickly, igniting a storm of grief, confusion, and disbelief among the townspeople. The Golden Twins, once admired and envied, had met a violent and heartbreaking end, and no one could understand why. The Whitley family was devastated beyond words. Their parents, who had always been proud of their sons, were left shattered by the loss. In the days following the discovery, their mother, Helen Whitley, could barely speak, her once vibrant and loving spirit now hollowed out by grief. She had lost both of her boys in one fell swoop, and the weight of that reality crushed her. She was often heard muttering, "I don't understand. They were so close. How did this happen?" Their father, Theodore Whitley, a man known for his stoic nature, had to take on the impossible task of planning a funeral for both of his sons. The strain of it all aged him in what seemed like an instant. He stood at the service, eyes fixed on the caskets, his mind still grappling with the unspeakable truth. The two boys he had watched grow up, side by side, were gone forever. But the worst part was not understanding why. The questions that gnawed at him. What had driven Sebastian to kill his brother and himself? What had gone so wrong? But the story didn't end there. As the community came together to mourn, secrets began to surface, revealing the darker, hidden side of the twins' lives. The police investigation, while officially concluding that the event had been a murder-suicide, left behind a trail of unanswered questions. Officers combed through the twins' belongings, looking for any signs of why things had gone so wrong. They found fragments, diary entries from Aiden, reflecting a growing sense of unease and guilt about their relationship, drawings from Sebastian, revealing an intense and consuming attachment to his brother that bordered on obsession. There were whispers throughout the town about the nature of the twins' relationship, whispers that grew louder as the truth slowly came to light. People who had once admired the Whitleys now exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if they had missed the signs all along. The twins had always been close, but had that closeness crossed a line? Rumors swirled about their relationship, hinting at something more than just brotherly love. Something forbidden, something that no one wanted to acknowledge but couldn't ignore. Friends and family members were interviewed for local news stories, their faces pale and voices trembling as they recounted their memories of Sebastian and Aiden. They were always together. One childhood friend said, "It was like they couldn't be apart. But none of us ever thought, we didn't see this coming. Not like this." Neighbors shared similar sentiments. "I remember seeing them at the store together," one woman recalled, "always laughing, always looking out for each other. But who would have thought? We thought they were just close. We had no idea what was really going on." The truth about Sebastian and Aiden's secret relationship was something that no one could have anticipated. And as the town grappled with the shock, more questions emerged. Had anyone known? Could anything have been done to stop the tragedy before it unfolded? The revelation about the nature of their bond cast a shadow over the entire community. The once pristine image of the Whitley twins was forever tarnished, replaced by an unsettling story of forbidden love and an obsession that had spiraled out of control. But even as people whispered about what had truly happened between them, no one could deny the deep sadness that lingered in the air. 2 lives had been lost, and the reasons behind their deaths, while now clearer, still left everyone with a profound sense of sorrow. In the wake of the tragedy, counselors were brought into the town's schools, offering support to the students who had known the twins. The community, though shaken, tried to rally together, but the sense of loss was too overwhelming. The Whitley twins had once been the pride of the town, and now their story was one of heartbreak and darkness. Helen and Theodore Whitley retreated into their grief, unable to face the outside world. Their home, once filled with laughter and the sounds of their son's footsteps, was now a hollow reminder of all they had lost. They kept to themselves, avoiding the sympathetic looks from neighbors and the questions from reporters who still lingered, hungry for more details about the tragedy. Helen, in particular, was haunted by the thought that she had missed something, that she could have stopped the events that led to her son's deaths, if only she had seen the signs earlier. But there were no answers for her, only the endless replaying of memories and the gnawing guilt that came with being a parent who had outlived their children. In the end, the story of Sebastian and Aiden Whitley became a cautionary tale, whispered about in hushed tones at school reunions and town gatherings for years to come. The twins' legacy, once one of hope and potential, had been replaced by the chilling reminder that love, when twisted by secrecy and obsession, could lead to destruction. The town of Coldwater, forever marked by the tragedy, would never forget the Whitley twins. Their story, one that began with so much promise, had ended in heartbreak and death, a stark lesson in the danger of unchecked desire and the peril of a love that became too much to bear. And for Helen and Theodore Whitley, the question that would haunt them for the rest of their lives remained. How could something so wrong have been happening right under their noses? How could they not have seen the storm brewing until it was too late? The story had ended, but the scars it left behind would never fully heal.